Hey everyone, it's Daniel Elwood and Robert Johnson, and we are the Last Nighters. You can find us on the Launchpad Media, where they're always launching new ideas in your direction. Check out thelaunchpadmedia.com. You can also find this episode at lastnighters.com/126, and we're going to be doing an episode about American Psycho, the movie that came out and made Christian Bale a thing. It came out in the year 2000, and we have a special guest, Pat MacFarlane of Liberty Weekly. He hasn't been so active on his show lately, but we are resurrecting him for just a brief appearance here. And he actually has done an episode related to American Psycho back when he was doing a segment called Thought Crime Thursday. We'll have that on the show notes page as well. But welcome back to the show, Pat. It's always a pleasure to have you on, sir. And if you can remind us where your website is and kind of what you did on it or do on it and what your plans are for the future. And then we'll get into the Google description on this here movie.
Hey, everybody. Patrick MacFarlane here. I am the host of the Liberty Weekly podcast, libertyweekly.net. I am a practicing attorney. I do civil rights work and personal injury, primarily personal injury. I'm licensed to practice in Wisconsin. Been practicing for about 2 years now, and I'm enjoying the joys of fatherhood currently, and that's kind of really gotten in the way of my work that I used to do at libertyweekly.net. But that's fine. I really enjoy being a dad, and there are some things that are more important than messing around on the internet, at least right now. So hopefully in the future, I'm hoping to at least hang on to the URL and keep it active. It'd be nice to get back to doing some more podcasting work or writing, but that's always something that's available to me. So just getting secure in my practice and learning how to be a dad, and we'll see what happens. But I'm glad to be back tonight.
Yeah, we always enjoy having you on. We've done a couple of summertime series with you. I think the first time was when you were trying to pass the bar exam or going through that process, and we did a series on Wild Wild Country, which was really awesome. We had various other podcast hosts on with us doing every episode. You were on the first episode and I think the last episode. And then last summer, when your kid was born, we did several episodes of Star Trek The Next Generation, which I thought was really awesome. That's a thought-provoking show. At least many of the episodes are. And there's always these moral dilemmas and conundrums that Picard always seems to navigate through flawlessly in that. And so that was a lot of fun. And I wouldn't mind doing more of that if you ever have the time.
Yeah, that'd be fun. Yeah, it had the added bonus of making me discover Star Trek The Next Generation, which is a really good show, and I don't know how I missed out on it, but I did. I was a Stargate guy, as we talked about. But yeah.
Yeah, so I will post the links to those episodes on the show notes page here, lastnighters.com/126. Also, everyone, if you like what we do here and you want to support us, you can hit us up at lastnighters.com/Patreon. And I just started a new kind of feature related to that, and that is to do a little ticker tape parade for the people who do support us. So you'll see some names on here. Dylan is the most recent Patreon, and so thank you for joining us and supporting the work that we do here, Dylan. We do appreciate that. And if anyone else would like to support us as well, go to lastnighter.com/Patreon. Another way you can support us is going to Robert's website, trubster.com, where he sells his wares of his artistic creations on various printed projects or items like t-shirts, hats, mugs, what have you. In fact, Robert, if you want to speak to that for just a moment, before we get into the Google description, and I will go to you for your opening salvo, because I threw you off last time on Apocalypse Now, and I want to make amends for that.
Well, okay. Yeah, I just do some silly kind of, libertarian voluntarist type stuff at tripster.com. I need to get back on doing more of that. It's something I haven't done in a while, but I should definitely do it. Although I'm super stoked. They've got, I think they added masks recently, so that's really exciting.
I like, I've seen an NPC mask recently where it's just like the little triangle nose and it's a gray, gray mask with a black triangle nose. So you can emit your virtue signals very appropriately wearing that.
No, that's some strong stuff there. I like it.
All right. Well, check it out, Trubster.com. That's TRUBBSTER. And let's get on with the show, shall we? So American Psycho came out in the year 2000. Almost sounds like the future. It's a horror / satire film, 1 hour and 44 minutes, 7.6 IMDb, 69% on Rotten Tomatoes, and 88% of Google users like it. The description is, in New York City in 1987, a handsome young urban professional, otherwise known as Yuppie, Patrick Bateman, played by Christian Bale, lives a second life as a gruesome serial killer by night. The cast is filled by the detective Willem Dafoe, the fiance Reese Witherspoon, the mistress Samantha Mathis, the coworker Jared Leto, and the secretary Chloë Sevigny. This is a biting, wry comedy examining the elements that make a man a monster. It came out on April 14th, the year 2000. Director Mary Herron, a box office of $34.3 million, and is based on a novel by Bret Easton Ellis, which is what, Patrick, I think you were reading a segment of on your episode of Liberty Weekly, Thought Crime Thursday, talking about this this vehicle or this property, whatever the right term is. But Robert, let's go to you for your opening salvo and your take on the Google description, please.
Well, I don't know if I'd call it a comedy. It's definitely have a few amusing moments, but the main character seems to be having a better time than I was in this one. I didn't really quite understand the character. It seemed to be this kind of yuppie in the 80s, this Wall Street kind of cocaine life type person, kind of like the Wolf of Wall Street sort of takedown. But it also at the same time tried to be some sort of an expert on pathology and like psychosis and like sociopathy. And I don't know, it didn't exactly ring entirely true for me as a character, but it was a fun character study for the most part, although a lot of the scenes were just completely unbelievable because you'd have literally almost the entire cast except for his girlfriend and his circle of friends and his secretary like mistake him for somebody else, which is okay, but people aren't like totally stupid. And I don't know, there's just a lot of times in the film when I was like, that would never happen. No, that's dumb. Okay, so I mean, you're trying to create this world where we're trying to explore this character, but the world they create is so kind of unbelievable that it didn't quite ring true for me. Didn't really bring it home. Although it was an entertaining film. Don't get me wrong, and it was fun to see all the different like famous actors when they were young. But I don't know. It seemed like it was trying really hard to say something really cool, but it just didn't seem to say much of anything to me. That's
I think there's a lot to that. I think that they were trying to go for kind of this Fight Club vibe. Like I saw some of the initial notes when this came out, like, oh, it's the next Fight Club or whatever. So they're going for that sort of angle of being overly gruesome, but also kind of almost tongue-in-cheek, but biting sort of satire, and going to extremes. So I think you're right that those were unbelievable situations, but they were trying to push those things all the way to the edge to where people are so consumed by consumerism that they don't even recognize each other. So like the humanity is lost. And we see this in the character, the Patrick Bateman character, who he's not even sure who he is. He's wearing a mask the entire time to kind of blend in as best as possible, but he isn't aware of his own humanity. He experiences no emotion. I think what they're trying to show us is that he's lashing out to try to feel something and trying to seek some kind of like repercussions or consequences or punishment. And jumping ahead to the end, the last line is, this confession has meant nothing because he doesn't experience any repercussions from the events in the film. Patrick, we'll go to you for your response to the Google description and anything that Robert and I have talked about already.
Yeah, I don't know if I'd really call it a comedy. I guess upon closer inspection, you find that it's more of a comedy. But I really resonated with the last thing that Robert said, because I've always been a huge fan of this film, and you can kind of hear me fanboy about it a little bit in my episode, which is you can find it at libertyweekly.net/22. But maybe the closer I took a look at this film over the years, and the book that goes along with it, the less that I've come to like it. And one part about the book is that it's a very dry read. And because most of the book is filled with these inane descriptions of exactly what designer clothes this person is wearing, down to, I guess just the clothing item and the pattern and the designer. And it's really overkill, but it's making a point. But an interesting note that I found is that if you were to actually see the clothes, the outfits that the author is describing, it would be absurd. Like nothing matches anything, and that's kind of part of the whole ambiance, the satire of it. But maybe my listeners will know this about me. I was a creative writing major in undergrad at the University of Minnesota, and the more that I study about this book and the more I look into it, the more it really reeks of this air that I sensed amongst a lot of my fellow classmates when I was at the university, is that it really gets meta to the point that it's like South Park. All these yuppies in San Francisco think their farts don't stink, so they like to fart and sniff them. Have you seen that? They just think they're so meta, but what Robert said is that he's really not saying much at all. And the more you look into it, this is not a story about what I wanted it to be about, which is a psychopathic, yuppie Wall Street financier, skull and bones type killer. It's really just a Marxist critique of consumerism in the 80s.
Yeah, it does seem like it is really just kind of like taking on the caricature of capitalism as excess, and that Wall Street is people who provide no value but exploit everyone, not only in securing their high six-figure incomes, but also in treating everyone else like garbage, even their quote-unquote friends. And that seemed to be the critique. Now, I have seen this movie several times, and I've only ever really watched it with the intention of understanding what's going on in the past week. And it's really weird to me. It's sort of like I would often hear songs and like the song, but not know what the lyrics were, or know what, maybe half the lyrics were, but not really get the intention behind it or whatever. And I feel like this movie was sort of similar to that, in that it had kind of this cool aesthetic to it. And there was some kind of cheeky, dark humor and some horror, like slaughtering people and whatever. And, when you're young and dumb and whatever, it's like kind of interesting and fun to watch that. But it's like this movie was all just a series of scenes that are memorable, but nothing really connecting them together. And when I watched it the other night with my wife, I was like, yeah, I remember this part, but not this part over here. Like I remember the iconic shit, where he's listening to, God, who is it?
Huey Lewis in the News.
Yeah, Huey Lewis, and he's putting on the rain jacket, and it's like, "You wearing a rain jacket?" He's like, "Yes, I am, Paul. And here's an axe." Whack, And there's probably 5 or 6 like iconic scenes that are super memorable, but all those interconnecting bits just kind of just wash over you. At least back when I first watched this, I've seen it probably 3 or 4 times, and I think that only now is the first time where I've really tried to pay attention to it. And you're right, it is kind of hollow. I don't even know if the story is what the arc is. The characters don't learn anything. Things kind of happen, or do they? By the end, we're not even. We're led to believe that our narrator is unreliable. So we don't know if any of this has happened at all, or if it's all in his head. Like that rampage at the end where he's like shooting back at cops and kills 4 cops. There would be repercussions from that, I can assure you. So the fact that there aren't any, and he's like trying to he did this confession to his lawyer buddy, and then he goes and talks to him at the end. He's like, hey, that confession, that was me. And the other guy just plays it off like it was some kind of a joke. It kind of leaves us in this spot where, well, if he actually did do this stuff, then things would happen to him. But the fact that nobody's believing him, it's almost like, okay, this is all delusions in his head that he might think are real, but no one, they didn't actually happen.
Yeah, are we led to believe that the Paul Allen apartment really was filled with corpses, or was it not?
I mean,
he just imagined it at the end, like when he comes in afterwards and it's all cleaned up. Was the real estate agent like just trying to sell the place to the next prospective buyers, or was he walking in there and expecting a massacre site like he left it, but it really never happened?
I mean, I think he intended to go clean it up, but then, they're selling it and it's like none of that ever happened. But to me, that real estate lady seemed like she was a little bit too knowing. Like maybe she was like a fixer of some sort, like she was in on things. And so it was like this fucking head trip thing. Yeah, you're not in your head, Patrick. I'll let you.
Well, I mean, I think it's ambiguous, but I think you're right. I think she knew about it and she was trying to cover it up because he went to the closet and she's seemed alarmed by that, like she knew that he knew what was there before and she wanted to get him out before, he uncovered the dirt about it. But going back to this whole idea that everything is, that he gets away with everything, that is such a leftist neoliberal self-critique or critique of capitalism or the perceived excesses of capitalism, what we know as cronyism, of course. But that and it goes back to the scene at the beginning of the movie where they go to the sushi restaurant where everything's in Braille and the goths meet them there, and Patrick Bateman makes this sarcastic comment about how what we need to do is end apartheid and do all these different things, this agenda that liberals spout but don't really believe through their actions.
I love that, by the way. It was so contradictory. And he was doing it, it seemed like, to make fun of, people who promote those things.
Take up these causes that are unsolvable. Yeah.
I liked that because in some ways, I think it's a self-aware critique of the liberal mindset, because they say they have these values and principles, but they don't really follow up on it. It's just vapid nonsense.
Right. It costs nothing to virtue signal.
Right. Yeah. And so, I mean, yeah, and you're right, Robert, that was a perfect example of making fun of virtue signaling back in the 2000s before we even had that phrase. But if you know Bret Easton Ellis, this is another thing about him, is that they made us study him in undergrad. We read Less Than Zero, which is really, I think it's about a privileged kid with rich parents who is a heroin addict in LA who lives a consequence-free lifestyle, but there's no supernatural or sociopathic edge to him, really. It's just kind of steeped in the 80s mystique of consequence-free living and being a privileged white kid in the 80s. You kind of realize that Bret Easton Ellis isn't really about necessarily writing what I would like, because I'm a horror fan, which would be horror films or horror novels rather. He has a really cool short story called The Secrets of Summer, which is about a vampire in LA who's very rich, Patrick Bateman-esque. But yeah, Bret Easton Ellis is he's a liberal, man. It's hard to get into the film knowing that. I don't know.
Yeah, does that change how you perceive things when you know the politics or the lifestyle of the creator, the author?
It shouldn't, but it does. Trying to get into so I don't know. One of my favorite bands is Napalm Death, and they're raging anarcho-communists. I still love them, but every time I hear them rail about something, you got to pick the good things they rail about. You can't let it ruin your perception of their art. I guess, Robert, you probably have something to say about that.
Well, like with Rage
yeah.
Against the Machine, like I like their music, but man, their politics are god awful.
Yeah.
And they're so dumb about it.
If we only consume media made by like ANCAPs and libertarians and stuff, there would be nothing to do.
There'd just be like this show and Part of the Problem by Dave Smith.
A couple of podcasts and
but
watch Atlas Shrugged a couple of times.
This book is vapid, though, in some points. I mean, there's good stuff there and there's good critique, like that self-aware conversation we were talking about. But if you, in his own words, Ellis is talking about, he explains, I'm quoting from an article in The Rake that I thought was interesting. First, he talks about how he really set up to, he studied a lot of New York financiers that he knew, and he wanted to base a character off of, the prototypical Wall Street 80s yuppie. And along the way, he was like, holy shit, this guy's going to be a psychopathic killer. So it's not like he set out to write a horror novel or set out to write, this this book about a psychopathic horror serial killer person. It's that he wanted to write a critique of capitalism in the 80s and ended up writing Patrick Bateman.
Well, is the murdering actually a metaphor for exploitation?
Yeah, and how they get away with everything. Exactly. Consequence-free living. But taking advantage of people. It's like he's taking these, how liberals, they always kind of virtue signal about how capitalism kills people and that kind of thing. This is the literal undertaking of it, the literal manifestation of it.
Well, is he saying that capitalists are a bunch of unfeeling sociopaths, basically?
Right. Yeah.
Creates this world where we just don't care about other people. We're just exploiting everybody all the time.
Yeah.
I mean, I've heard that critique of fiduciary responsibility to investors, to the stakeholders and stockholders in the company, is that you're supposed to seek profit no matter what in this heartless and unfeeling way. And that seems to be like a thing that is just in the culture, like that's just what you hear whenever you hear about like how corporations operate in popular culture, even in education. But when you really think about it, what does a business actually do? Well, they try to make a profit by taking inputs and improving upon them so that somebody wants them and is willing to part with their money in exchange for those things to better their own lives. It's solving a problem for them. So everyone benefits. Now, yeah, there's a bunch of bastardization with the corporation structure and lobbying for specific things that offer protectionism or other restrictions and barriers to entry for competition, so that you can have shoddier product and lower quality and higher prices. Sort of like a pseudo monopoly situation or a public-private partnership situation. But when it really comes down to it, is you're only going to patronize a business or a service if it's going to do something for you, or you have a gun to your head, like when you have to, buy certain products because the government dictates that you must.
Absolutely, Daniel.
Well, and what you're saying too is kind of a love story to this idea of a fiduciary relationship, in the inverse, because this legal relationship is super beneficial. I mean, you're talking about some of the most sacred things that our legal system defines would be a fiduciary relationship or a trustee relationship, something like that. So, yeah.
All right, don't go full lawyer on us.
That's it. That's all I got.
I remember one of the episodes we did a couple of years ago where you went on this like 20-minute lawyerly rant, and it was great stuff, but it was like so dry.
Well, that's what you want from when you have a lawyer guest on, isn't it?
I don't think so, Patrick.
So this other topic, I'm host of this now.
You gonna hijack?
Yeah.
Sweet.
No, the other thing is Bret Easton Ellis was saying that the book is really about the dandification of the American male. That's his statement. What do you think about that? I mean, is this a book critiquing capitalism, or is that part of the dandification of the American male?
Can you explain damnification? What does this mean?
It was really about, quote, it was really about what is going on with men now in terms of surface narcissism. Beginning in the 80s, men were prettifying themselves. They were taking on a lot of the tropes of gay male culture and bringing it into straight male culture in terms of grooming, looking a certain way, going to the gym, waxing, and being almost the gay porn ideals. You can track that down to the way Calvin Klein advertised underwear in a movie like American Gigolo, The Reemergence of Gentlemen's Quarterly.
But would you do that with such a psychotic character? Wouldn't you just try to normalize it? I mean, there were most of the people as friends were also similar, but no one was to the level that Bale was in this film. He was taking it to a whole new level compared to everybody else.
Jared Leto maybe was. But
Yeah,
they're
maybe.
all, what you're missing, or what the person is missing though is at the beginning scene when they all go to the club, you realize that all of Bateman's cadre, they're all fucking dorks. Like if you see the guy dancing at the beginning, you remember that scene? He looks super lame, and he wouldn't be cool except for his suit and the coke in his pocket.
Yeah, that's
that
one of
does
those,
make people cool.
that's one of the scenes that I didn't even remember until I saw it again recently. It wasn't iconic and it wasn't filler, or it was filler. It was something like when my wife and I were watching it, I was like, well, this is the unrated cut, not the theatrical. And so we thought there might be some extra stuff in there. Turns out there's only 18 seconds extra. So the difference is really, really minor. And I was like, well, was this dancing scene added? And apparently not. It's in the theatrical cut, and I've seen this version 3 times, 4 times, and it's there and just not memorable.
Yeah, this movie seriously suffers from having no narrative plot structure. Like Daniel was saying earlier, a movie is not telling a good story when you can rearrange all the scenes and have it be essentially the same story. And you could rearrange a whole bunch of scenes in this film. You could also remove scenes, like the detective. I don't even know what's the point of him. When he was first showed up, I'm like, oh, okay, he's going to get investigated. Maybe he's going to get found out. No, just dies. That plot thread just ends at some point. And I get it. The movie's trying to make this kind of point that he gets away with it all, or it was all in his head. I'm not sure, but it was trying to make a commentary on all this, like we've been talking about. But from a narrative plot structure point, it's just a series of garbage scenes. I mean, interesting scenes, but it doesn't come together to form sometimes you need to have one before the other, but a whole lot of times you can just rearrange these scenes and have it be the same film. And like Dan said, you remember scenes, but you don't necessarily remember the plot of this thing.
Yeah. And I don't know, I almost want to apply more sinister stuff to this. Like we talked about the lady who's this real estate agent, and she seems more knowing than she ought be.
Or is that in his head?
Yeah. Or is that in his head? Or is this one of those fucking, government psyops where she's his handler and he's responding Manchurian Candidate style to stimuli and carrying out these brutal acts and then having these handlers cover up for him?
That's some serious fan theorizing. He got going there, Daniel. I like it. Almost zero evidence in film, but I like it. I don't know, Pat. Do you know more about the book? Is there any of that, or is this a pretty faithful adaptation? Do you know?
It's relatively faithful, although there is a lot more of those cutaway scenes in the book. A lot more shock violence too. So it is pretty faithful, but the book is confusing as hell. It's been a couple of years since I read it. But I mean, the book is filled with, granted, it is beautiful prose from a literary sense, but it's really boring to read those parts of it. And you constantly are confused about who's who. I mean, obviously, because everyone's mistaking everyone for everyone else. But it is.
Well, and if there's no real plot driving it along,
yeah,
you're not really anticipating any action or blown away by any particular action. It's just stuff happening on screen. Like Like the scene where he's upset about the business cards. Great scene.
Yeah.
You could put that any number of places in the movie. That's just one example. There's a pile of them like that.
Yeah, all the business cards, like to me, a layperson, looked virtually identical.
Which is, I guess, supposed to be the point, right? Like he's so
Yeah.
outraged by just the slightest difference.
But then the nerdiest of them all comes up with a gold foil on his card, and that just like pisses him off to no end. And is that the moment where he then goes into the bathroom and intends to kill him? Was it after he sees that card?
Yes. Yeah.
Yeah. In
Right.
the second business card scene. Yeah. When
Yeah.
the nerdy friend comes up in the restaurant.
But
Right,
at the same time, the other guy in their group doesn't care about the business cards. The one sitting in the corner. You know what I'm talking about?
Yeah, is it the guy who's like kind of blonde and like you've seen him in a bunch of stuff, but you don't know who he is?
Yeah.
Yeah.
And Bateman's the only one that cares. But I wanted to touch on something you said, Daniel, about the conspiracy and she's his handler. There was a scene where the detective comes in and he's interviewing Bateman for the first time, and Bateman talks about, oh, he was a part of that whole Yale thing. And I'm thinking Skull and Bones, right? Because you guys remember I'm all about conspiracies, right?
Right. Yeah. Yeah. John Kerry and George W. Bush were Yale, right?
Right. But he's saying, no, what Yale thing, right? Well, no, it's the closet homosexuality and cocaine thing, not the Skull and Bones thing.
It's cute. Yeah.
Yeah. That's almost like a tactic to deflect, right?
Limited hangout. Yeah. Poisoning the well.
Yeah.
The Yale thing is closet homosexuality and cocaine.
Right. So you give it like you give the overall concept like a little bit of play, but then you divert it to something else. It's almost like we've talked about this recently, Robert, where conspiracy theory, that whole concept came from a psyop because people were looking into the JFK assassination.
Yeah.
And so the CIA came up with, well, let's just call it conspiracy theory, and that would be just a way to dismiss it out of hand. And you see it today. It's all about, like the current pandemic. Well, if anyone questions the narrative, it's conspiracy theory. And so that just means, well, I don't have to submit an argument.
Any evidence, any counter evidence, you just dismiss it as this person must be a crazy.
Right. And they've expanded that to mean, or to other phrases like, well, you're a white man, so therefore, irrelevant or whatever. There's a lot of like throwaway things, or like saying it's racist or whatever. Those are ways to squash dissent and not have a valid or legitimate counter argument. I'm not saying that there aren't racist people. There are, but I'm saying that the way it gets liberally thrown around, especially when it's not intended to be so, or it's an ambiguous interpretation or a least favorable interpretation of certain events, it's meant to not have discourse, but to shut down discourse. And you're not going to learn anything from that. And it's a tactic to, I guess, safeguard your fragile, echo chamber psyche that you get from social media. That I don't know, this is kind of a developing thing in my head, but I think social media is a continuation, or like a continuation of echo chambers, where you can sort of select which chamber you want to be in and then just get reinforcement. And thus you can believe whatever narrative and facts you want and see them in the light that supports what you think in a preconceived notion, and dismiss anything that another person might be doing the exact same thing with, but from another perspective, as conspiracy, or because they're white male, or because they're racist, or whatever. Meanwhile, on their side, they're going to do the same shit and think everything that you say is full of shit because it's, leftist or whatever. And I'm not saying that I got to be careful here, but I think most of the time leftists are pretty wrong, but they are occasionally right. Like Robert, you and I have talked about how they are often correct in diagnosing the grievances. Like, where there is a problem, but they attribute it to the wrong causes. And so therefore they always advocate for more of the same policies or ideas that created the whole situation to begin with. So I don't know. I feel like I'm throwing out this like randomized fucking concept, but I think you guys get what I'm throwing out there, right?
Well, you said a lot of words there, Daniel. I do appreciate it when you say
a lot
words.
of platitudes.
Well, this article I shared with you in the chat for the show notes, it talks about Bret Easton Ellis muses about whether or not Patrick Bateman would be active on social media if he were a part of the world today. He thinks
what they conclude.
He would be
almost certainly
Instagram showcasing his wealth, his abs, and his potential victims.
So he'd be like Joe Exotic.
Yeah.
You know, it's interesting. This is an angle you brought up. And then, Robert, I'll go to you because I do want feedback on this like hodgepodge of bullshit I just spouted. But
I don't know what part of the bullshit to respond to, though, but go ahead.
Whatever you want, man. So there was a marketing of the movie that happened by Lionsgate or whoever produced this, where they would say, hey, sign up for this email list and you'll get emails from Patrick Bateman himself. And so you got to join this like email list and whatever. And it would give you all this background information, emails from Patrick talking about things after the events in the movie and related to the characters in it. And even characters from the book who are like named differently or not even in the movie. And Christian Bale took offense to this because he's like, this isn't the kind of movie that you need this kind of shocky marketing. It's not American Pie, you know? So he was very much against this sort of this narrative being pushed that it was Patrick Bateman responding to people like in this kind of marketing way. And he felt like people would think that Patrick Bateman was really responding to them. And so I don't know, it's kind of weird, but
what? I could see him.
Bale is kind of weird. He's a weird dude.
Yeah, he's a weird dude. I understand, but I can see him objecting to the marketing strategy, but I can't object in saying him thinking that people would think that Bateman's a real person. What?
Yeah, like he thought it was out of character that Bateman would be responding to people.
Oh, okay. Okay, so it's out of the character that he created. So yeah,
I think so. But
okay, I feel that.
But also, I mean, this was a movie that I think this was Bale's big break.
Yes,
and
it made his career for sure.
It was a movie that he had been like signed on board for, and then let go from, and then signed on board for, and then let go from for like 3 or 4 years. And it ended up being the one that like made him. But I think he had sort of that crazy dedication to his craft. Like you see it in where he loses tons of weight in The Machinist, or he gains a bunch of weight for
Batman, or for that other movie he did.
What was the Dick Cheney one? Vice.
Yeah.
So he gained a bunch of weight for that, and he worked out super hard for Batman and for American Psycho. But I've also seen like behind the scenes footage of him like berating a lighting guy because
he was on the
like,
set of Terminator 3.
Yeah, because he's like
famous incident
in the way of some shot or whatever. He's like, "Do you see me going through and fucking up your lighting situation?" You know.
Yeah. So pretty sweet rant.
He kind of had his like prima donna shit already happening. It seems early on. I mean, he's a great actor. I love his work. I think he's great for the most part. I mean, the Terminator 3, not so good. There's a few movies where he's like kind of hamming it a little bit, or it comes off hammy because I think maybe he's trying too hard, especially for the tone of the movie.
Yeah, I mean, he definitely comes off as a very dedicated actor, more of a high-strung type, not so much the laid-back type. So I can see why he would be berating some camera guy, as opposed to say like the guy. Well, who's the guy who played the Big Lebowski? Jeff Bridges. Yeah. I don't think there's any dirty tapes on him, just like chewing some poor staffer out.
Or like McConaughey.
Yeah. No, McConaughey, I'm sure he's pretty chill to hang out with. But you know, you get the good with the bad. You get you get that high-strung, super dedicated actor who's going to bring life to this weird role. You know, it's going to come at some cost. You can't just be a normal dude and lose 100 pounds of body weight in like 3 months, or gain 100 pounds of body weight in 3 months and be totally normal, not expect some kind of deficiencies mentally or something. I mean, he's going to have some bad days.
He's gonna be hangry.
Yeah, he's going to need a Snickers, man. I mean, you know, I wouldn't want to hang out with that guy.
Yeah. So back to my like sort of randomized thesis. Is there any part of it on which you have any comment?
Well, you're talking about like the echo chamber of different ideologies. I mean, yeah, we all have that desire to have our beliefs reinforced. And with the internet and other forms of especially increasingly stratified media, it's easier and easier to find your groups and your niche and to have your beliefs reinforced over and over again, even though it's also just as easy to go and see the opposing view, or at least a different opinion, if not completely opposing. It's just people are less and less likely to do that. I mean, you got a limited amount of time in your day, and you want to feel good. You don't want to necessarily have to do some hard thinking and question your beliefs and whatnot. That's not nearly as fun. I mean, there are some people that do it. They're very, very few. You got like maybe 1% of the population that's really enjoying, you know, that kind of mental challenge. But most people like to live their lives and feel good in their views. And you're not going to feel good in your views if you're constantly having your beliefs challenged. It's easier to see some opposing piece of information and dismiss it and say that it was made by bigots or, you know, whatever.
Yeah, patriarch.
Have you guys noticed this in the libertarian community?
I try not to pay too much attention to the libertarian community anymore.
What now, Patrick?
Wise choice. Yeah, I don't know. I have hundreds of friends on Facebook who are in the libertarian community, and it's like just scrolling through the timeline, you just see the same shit over and over and over and over and over again. Just
yeah.
Well, the thing that gets me is at least libertarians are often consistent, or at least they have a lot more consistency than most folks. Like my wife, she has a friend who espouses these platitudes that are fluffy and duffy and flowery and sound nice and well-intentioned and woke or virtuous or whatever, but then the next statement out of this person's feed is something totally contradictory, and it's like they don't even notice it. It's really a bizarre situation where they like pretend to have these opinions that are principled and have these positions, but then they'll say something completely opposite like moments later and not notice that there's any discrepancy between those two positions at all. What's your take on that, Pat? Do you see some similar even in the libertarian community, or mostly outside of it?
Well, I mean, it's mostly outside of it. I mean, it's hard to say because in the libertarian community, you get, I guess, nuance on certain issues. Like, I mean, you get some contention on certain issues, you know, like borders or prostitution or sex work, that kind of thing. But more so in the libertarian community, you get this, and I've just had, you know, such burnout too, and that's another reason why I don't do my show anymore. But you also get the sense that, and I've gone through this in my own journey as a libertarian, but there's this overwhelming sense that everything is black and white. And that doesn't really mean that libertarianism is wrong. It just means that there is this tendency to think that you're superior just because you have the non-aggression principle and private property rights, but you can never stray from this black and white thinking. And my legal practice and the experience that I've had in the real world, and I hate that phrase because it's kind of elitist, but there's a lot more nuance. And Andrew Kern is I think he's right about this. He's, you know, a principled libertarian, but he's had a lot of good critiques and he's really shaped a lot of my own thinking on these topics. But he's had a lot of good critiques of the community and the theory. He's right that, and he had a little spar with Dave Smith. Did you guys see that a couple months ago, where Dave read some of his articles? And I don't always agree with Andrew Kern, but he's right in that libertarians tend to see things in black and white, and that's not what the world is.
Yeah, I'm starting to recognize that as well myself, that there's a lot of nuance to all sorts of issues. And the NAP, while it's a nice cornerstone, it doesn't give you the answer to everything. And in a way, I think I've been influenced by people who want to talk about culture and cultural differences between people, and celebrating cultural differences and advocating for ones that help advance society. You know, and if other people want to have other cultures, that's fine, but it doesn't mean that we need to amalgamate or homogenize culture. Like, the differences are a good thing, I think, and maybe that might be the end result of this pain that we're experiencing with social media, allowing people to stratify and like fragment. Maybe that will come into a real world situation where people will secede, and those who wish to live certain ways can be, you know, in a geographic area where that's like a thing that's part of that culture, and other people can be in another area where other things are part of their culture. And I don't think that necessarily needs to be a bad thing. I don't know where it's going to go, but I don't see the current situation as being tenable all that much longer, where there's this massive, you know, 330 plus million people all kind of subservient to a small city on the Potomac.
I would like to be in agreement with you, Daniel. I just I tend to think that the status quo has a serious like stranglehold on the minds of most of the people around here. And I know for one, I've felt more and more alone, I guess you could say, with all the actions of the people as a result of this pandemic, and the absolute lockstep go along status of the vast majority.
You know what's great about this whole pandemic thing? It's like all the previous enemies have been defeated or shown to be not that bad. And so now they're like, okay, well, let's come up with something that's even going to fragment libertarians. You know, let's scare the shit out of people and have them exchange their freedom for security. And so many people gave that bargain, you know, accepted that bargain way more than I thought. And we've sort of talked about this on previous shows, where I was dismayed by how much more outnumbered we are than I ever thought that we were. But the more that this goes on, the more that these lockdowns go on, I think the more that people are starting to realize that these betters, these experts, are really full of shit, and that they're not looking out for your best interest. They're looking out for their best interest, and they're not always right. They're not infallible, and they don't look at all of the costs and benefits and analysis of what the consequences of their actions are going to be. They are the Patrick Batemans of the situation. They are the ones living the consequence-free life, and they've been getting away with it for a long, long time. And maybe now we're starting to see the emperor is in fact not wearing any clothes, not even those like $3,000 suits and the fucking, you know, masks and the creams that Patrick Bateman's putting on in this movie, that these people are actually monsters. And you know, the striking thing that really showcases this for me is the directors of health for the various cities and counties and states and even countries, who go up there and tell us how to live you know, healthy in this pandemic, and they are the most unhealthy looking people I've ever seen. You know, it's amazing.
Yeah. Sometimes you got to trust the experts. Well, let's see what the experts look like. And they don't look great.
Yeah, and it's not like necessarily that they're wrong, but you know, Steph always had this argument, well, who are you going to take health advice from? Somebody who looks trim and fit and eats well and exercises, or somebody who has the exact same information, but they're morbidly obese. Obviously, one's going to have more weight, wink, wink, than the other. And so, one's going to have more credibility and the other's not.
That's right, buddy.
And that goes back to nuance, like you were talking about, Patrick. Like, it's not just the argument, because they could be saying the exact same thing, but one is going to be more acceptable to people than the other based on who's delivering it and the lifestyle that they chose. If they're going to live by the principles that they espouse, then it's going to hold a lot more credence for people.
I was going back on the episodes we've had and, the State of the Libertarian Union podcast that we've had. I'm such a doomer and gloomer, but it's gotten even worse with all this. I mean, talk about feeling alone. And it's been like, in some instances, my parents have become a lot more red-pilled because of this in a good way. But even so, even the people that are kind of awake and questioning the narrative, they're still within that 3x5 index card. They're still within the spectrum of acceptable opinion. And yes, I mean, being opposed to the lockdown, they're not opposed to the lockdown because they necessarily care about, intangibles like the Bill of Rights or freedom or liberty. The vast majority of people are inconvenienced. And it's not that they have a principled stance per se. It's just that, or if they're avoiding the lockdown, it's just because they are sick and tired of not seeing their family. And in some ways that's a really good thing, but the being alone because you're the only ones that see the world the way that we do, it's even more isolating than it was before,
Yeah, I see a lot of that, and I was in that phase a little while ago. Speaking of phases of reopening, but I've gotten a little bit more uplifted by, like, I've only been to the store 3 times since the lockdowns even went into effect, and the first time things were kind of normal. I felt like I was like an early adopter of, like, okay, I'm gonna fucking stock up on stuff. I'm gonna get chickens. I'm gonna get as much as I can while my money still spends. And then I went again, like maybe a month and a half later, and things were even weirder, but still fairly normal. Like, I was able to get, into the store. They had a limited number of people who were allowed to be in, and not everything was there on the shelves. All the frozen stuff and a lot of the meat was gone, things like that. But then I went just a few days ago, and yeah, there's still like supply chain disruptions, and there's been a lot of destruction in the structure of production when it comes to foods and, slaughtering of animals and underturning of crops because of regulations and other things preventing those things from actually making it to market and whatnot. And I think that we're going to see a lot of those repercussions down the road. And it's going to be a very difficult pill for people to swallow come in 3 or 4 months from now, I think. But the people's opinion of the people I talked to, like, there was an old lady, she wasn't wearing a mask. She got within 3 feet of me and was talking to me about things. And she was like, yeah, this is bullshit. Like, I have this, generator thing. I haven't used it. I don't even think I need it anymore. And this other lady was like, excuse me, I need to get by. And she was wearing a mask, and there was plenty of room for her to get by, but not 6 feet of room. So, it was a little bit hit or miss. Then I talked to the checker, and he was like, yeah, I think people are kind of over this now. Like, we've been really busy. It's Memorial Day weekend. People are like fed up with this shit, and they're ready to just move on. The numbers have not panned out in the doomers predictions, and there's a minute increase in your daily risk of living, but there's risk in everything. And this is, a shark attack or a lightning strike, or, maybe it's more risky than that, but it's not like you're definitely going to get this and you're definitely going to die, like what they tell you on the news. Like, if you were to go to Patrick Bateman's apartment, for the most part, you were probably going to die. except for his secretary, Jean. Maybe we can tie this back to the movie. Why did he spare her, in your opinion, Pat?
I have no idea. I don't know. Maybe because she was different than every one of his victims. She wasn't quite as aloof. She was more naive, perhaps. What do
So
you
maybe
think?
this goes back to the caricature of capitalism, where the people don't have an identity. They're exploiting each other. They don't know who they are or who their friends are, and it's not important to them to know who those people are. And so it was easier for Patrick Bateman to kill them because it didn't matter, because he was looking for humanity. He didn't see it. He didn't see it in himself. He didn't see it in them. So killing them was like a nothing thing. And he was looking for something, some kind of consequence, some kind of humanity. And perhaps he found it in Jean because she wasn't vapid. She wasn't empty. She wasn't sure what she wanted to do, but she also wasn't like so cocksure, yet so empty that it would have been like easy for him to just be like, well, she's, useless eater, whatever, mouth breather. And so he spared her. But the other side of that was that his fiance left him a message while she was there. And there was a little bit of this, like, he's saying one thing and she's hearing another. He's like, oh, it's not safe for you to be here. I'm not sure I can control myself. Something bad might happen to you. I don't want to hurt you. And she hears, oh, I don't want to get emotionally involved with you, or I don't want us to get physically intimate because I've got this fiance, and that's going to end up getting you hurt because you're always attracted to guys who are unattainable or unavailable or whatever. But what he means is, no, it's not safe because I'm going to murder you. So there's like a little bit of that, like the words meant something different to either side of the table in that exchange. And I thought that was actually pretty a nice moment in the movie, a nice scene to see.
Yeah,
that.
it was a decent little scene, although I don't really understand why he wanted to kill her in the first place. Like, his motivations, at one point in the movie, he says he can only feel two things: greed and disgust. And you're right, maybe he doesn't feel disgust about her. I thought originally he was going to kill her because she knew the detective was chasing him, and maybe she had some kind of insight on some murders or something. But then he didn't kill her, so then that couldn't be it. Unless he wanted to get caught, like sort of at the end. I don't know. It was all confusing to me.
Well, but there was the whole, like, he has this like crazy bloodlust urge, like when he kills the homeless guy early on and then stomps out the dog, which, man, that was like, that was the scene that really bothered me the most out of this whole movie, was when he stomps the dog and
Can't kill a dog, man. Kill as many prostitutes as you want. Can't kill a dog.
How come the Blue Liners can get away with it?
Daniel, I'm telling you.
Yeah, I don't know. That was the thing that really bothered me. But him killing that guy, was that out of disgust? He's like, why don't you get a job, man? Like, did you just like drink yourself out of a job or whatever? So that was him being the evil capitalist exploiter saying, why don't you just pull yourself up by your bootstraps, you bum?
But why did he kill the people that were just like him, though? Was he disgusted at himself? And that's it? Because he killed Paul Allen, who was basically his clone.
But his better. He had a nicer apartment. He had a nicer business card.
Right.
A better girlfriend or whatever.
Right. And then he ended up using that apartment. So I guess you could say it's greed, but not necessarily. I mean, he took his identity, sort of.
Right. Which he didn't really have much of an identity himself. Like, he talks about that during his routine of getting himself cleaned up. He's like, I wear this mask of humanity, but there's nothing behind this mask. Like, Patrick Bateman isn't even a real thing.
Yeah. So what do you think, Daniel? Is this movie deep or shallow? You really got something to say here? Or is it just a collection of scenes of like cool fight killing scenes?
I want to say that, and we can get in some final summary review unless you guys have any other notes. We can just get into that now. And fine, let's do that. So, yeah, I think that this movie, upon initial viewings, it is just a series of cool scenes mixed in with not so cool scenes that aren't really there to tie anything together. Like there isn't a whole lot of a strong narrative or a story arc. Nobody learns anything in this. And so, yeah, I liken it to music and a catchy beat and, a nice hook. And that's pretty much it. And that's the various scenes that you remember. And then the rest of it is just kind of there and you don't notice it until you're really paying attention. But it has a nice style to it. Bale's performance is really good. I think that perhaps, to your question, Robert, it has a bit of a cult following because you can maybe read a bigger and deeper message into these things, like I sort of tried to do earlier tonight with the whole idea of him being a psyop and having a handler and whatnot. But it also being a critique of capitalism or consumerism or vapidness of the 80s and the go-go culture of Wall Street and all of those things. And so perhaps it is back to that, that old trope of the subjective experience, the viewer's experience that they bring to something in their viewing of it that can lend it some more meaning than it might otherwise have. So I want to say that it's not a great movie. If you apply some ideas to it and read certain context into it, then maybe it can mean something more. But as a standalone movie telling you a story, it's really just empty scenes mixed in with some kind of interesting scenes that are memorable, and then it's kind of over and you're not sure whether it really happened or not. So with that, I'm not going to give it a very strong recommendation, but it's still a black and gold, just not super strong. If I were applying a number to it, I'd probably give it a 6. So Robert, let's get your response on that and then your take.
Yeah, if this movie ended where it was a definitive, haha, suckers, it all was all in his head, I'd be like, ugh, this garbage movie. Total, complete garbage. I hate that kind of whole fake out thing. So I'm going to take it as he really did kill all those people and everything we saw really did happen. I prefer to watch it that way. You can play around with unreliable narrators, but I think you got to do it in a better way. In this movie, yeah, capitalism always gets like these evil, maniacal corporate leaders or psychopathic killers as the worst examples of capitalism. And this gets kind of like, look what could happen under capitalism. You can't have this. But then people don't point at like The Founder, which is a very, I think, honest view of what capitalism actually is. I mean, it's about McDonald's. People complain about McDonald's. At least they used to back in the day. Maybe they still do. I don't know. Maybe people have kind of gotten over McDonald's. It's not the big boogeyman that it used to be. But once upon a time, it was one of the evil corporations that's making us all fat and going to kill us all with heart disease. Maybe there's people still that think that, but it used to be one of the big boogeyman companies. And The Founder, it's all about how it started. So it's got to be all about evil capitalists, right? But I dare you to watch The Founder and go, man, look at these evil capitalists. I just don't think it's there. So if you really want a better example of what capitalism, I think watch that film. But this one, I think, like I said, it's a series of flashy scenes that's trying to find a plot somewhere. It ends up being a better character study than a narrative film. But when it got to the end, I was like, wait, was that it? I thought when the big cop chase scene was going to happen, then he gets caught. And then, he ends up dying in a big shootout at the end or something. Like something happens to the guy, some kind of conclusion. But instead it was, he can't actually get caught. And then there's sort of like lesson there to be learned. It didn't resonate with me. I appreciated that they're doing something different, but I don't recommend this film to like the cult following that it has. I don't recommend it to like a wider audience to go see. I think this is like a 3.5, maybe a 4. It's just, wow. It's not great. It's just not, there's a whole lot of style, right? I mean, it's like basically taking like Reservoir Dogs. I'm going to put on some music and murder people.
And talk about it intellectually.
While I'm murdering you. So yeah, Quentin Tarantino did it like 13 years before you. So congratulations. I don't know. It seemed like it was a try-hard film. Bale's performance was perfectly fine, and it had a kind of an interesting angle and style to it, but ultimately it didn't resonate with me.
All right, and we'll go over to Patrick Bateman himself, Pat MacFarlane of LibertyWeekly.net.
Yeah, bouncing off that, I kind of touched on this earlier, but I really think that, Bret Easton Ellis is the babe of English departments at Big Ten universities, or, English departments in universities across the country. They really kind of move towards having these newer authors be part of the syllabus or the syllabi. And I think a lot of it is they're a lot more meta than they think they are, and they're a lot more into their own work and the work of the scene than maybe they should be. All in all, I think a lot of the cult following behind this film, and maybe I'm speaking to my own experience, but a lot of the cult following in this film is because people mistake it for what they want it to be, or what I would like it to be, which is a really gory horror film. But what it really is, I think, is kind of a shallow take on consumerism and capitalism, something that takes itself more seriously than perhaps it should. And maybe that's our own bias. Maybe it is a really brilliant work that really disassembles everything that we believe in here at this show, which is voluntary exchange, capitalism. But I don't know. All in all, like I said, upon subsequent viewings and deeper exploration, every time I watch the movie, it means a bit less to me and is a bit more shallow. So I'll give it 6.5 or a 7, because at one point in time, I really adored this film for its shock value. And I think that's most of what it has, is shock value. And upon deeper it leaves you wanting. But I forgot to mention, my grandma babysat Willem Dafoe when he was a kid. I don't know if I mentioned this to you guys.
I've heard it.
Have you? Okay. We've talked Willem Dafoe before, but she babysat him in Appleton, Wisconsin in the 1940s. So there you go. There's my connection.
He's in a lot of great stuff. I like him as an actor. He's got that creepy vibe to him. He's got when he's older, he's older now, but like he's got that Christopher Walken creep to him.
Yeah.
And there's nobody else quite like him, and he's always pretty magnetic on screen. So yeah, he brings a really good
Did you see the
presence. The Lighthouse. You saw The Lighthouse? I haven't seen The Lighthouse, but I saw a review of The Lighthouse where people were just raving about it. Then I went and checked the Amazon reviews, and half were going, "This is the most incredible thing I've ever seen," and the other half were like, "This is absolute garbage trash."
Yeah.
Which side of the line are you on that, Patrick?
You want me to go into a big soliloquy here?
You got that kind of time?
I think it's intense. I think it's good. It's very deep. I didn't get rap music before, but then I saw Tyler, the Creator, one of his music videos, and I was like, shit, there's so much going on here, and I don't get any of it. And that's kind of what The Lighthouse was.
Okay.
Yeah.
When I first saw American Psycho, I thought, oh, this is a good movie. But I couldn't tell you why, other than the flash and the style and whatever. And it sticks with you. Like, how many movies have come out since then, and how many do you remember? This is in that 10% that you remember for whatever reason.
Yeah, The Flash.
The Flash.
It reminds me, though, of when my taste in music really matured. I have a rule that you can't give judgment on an album unless you've heard it 10 times. And if I heard it for the first or the second time and I didn't like it, I still have to invest 3 or 4 more listenings into it before I can really tell if there's something there or there's not something there. And this is a movie I've seen 3 or 4 times, maybe 5 or 6, and I'm realizing there's not as much there as I thought before.
Yeah. Yeah, this is the whatever the commercialized pop that gets trotted out and like everyone thinks is good for a little while, and then turns out it's actually garbage.
Yeah, that's Bret Easton Ellis for the whole, apartment community, all the trendy. Yeah.
All right. Well, thank you for being our guest. I hope you can stick around for just a little bit of Kathleen Turner Overdrive, which is available for our Patreon supporters at lastnighters.com/Patreon. It's some bonus content we do. We also do pre-show content. So if you send us a couple of Federal Reserve notes on a monthly basis, you can get access to most of that, as well as the live streams, which we're doing presently. And speaking of presently, Robert, I have a present for you, and that is one of the podcasts that you like is going to be a guest on our show, this podcast that you maybe like a little bit. We're going to have Prof CJ from the Dangerous History podcast on for the 75th anniversary of D-Day, the storming of Normandy, June 6th, 1944.
Can I guess the film?
You can guess the film, yes.
Well, it can't be about a guy named Ryan. You're not going to try and save him.
It is, yeah. And I guess it was 45, right? It must have been. Why did I say 44? It's been 75 years. This is 2020, right?
I think it's 2020.
I'm
Pat,
pretty
can you
sure.
confirm? I don't know.
Wait, so you're fucking following me up with Prof CJ? Fuck you guys.
Well, you're setting the table, baby. It's all right.
I'm an eclectic, C-roll libertarian community star, and you're following me up with an A-lister. Fuck off.
Well, I want to say that we've been trying to get a few A-listers on this show, and we've had a few shots across the bow, and they didn't work out. And this one seems to be pretty solid. So we'll see how it goes. But he's a good dude, and he's agreed to come on. And Saving Private Ryan will be the movie, and we will be doing that next week. So hold on to your hats, everyone. We're going to be getting into the war movie. We did Apocalypse Now last week, which I thought was a really great episode. We had John Reed on for that, and he's a bit of a film analysis buff himself, and I think that one was a lot of fun. I had a good conversation. And Robert, I think this also was a good conversation with our buddy Pat.
Yeah, I tend to agree with you, Dan. You might be right.
All right, thank you. Well, why don't you remind the contestants what they can win if they support the show and the various ways in which they can do so before we get into the Kathleen Turner Overdrive.
Oh, so many virtual feel-good moments. It just tickles your giblets. Man, you really feel the moral superiority, and just you feel like a rock star, like the best human on the planet when you support the show. Yeah, I mean, there's really no other feeling quite like it when you click that Patreon donate $1 button. I mean, it's not quite like, the birth of your first child, but it's somewhere towards the bottom of that list. So you might want to go do it. Support us on that. You got the Apple peoples, with the podcast. You could give us some stars, give us some reviews there. You can subscribe to us on the tubes. You could reply to one of our videos. You could click a like button. You can do all those things and more if you're feeling up to the task.
And if you're cool.
Want those virtual hugs. And unless you have got a bunch of tapes you need to return.
Yeah, speaking of tapes to return, we do have a few tapes to return to the video store. So check this out at lastnighters.com/126 for show notes and more. And we will say the old good night from last night, everyone. Peace out.